I'm going to do something I haven't done in a while. Throwing the script in the trash. I've done a ton of Let's Build Kenshi videos. It all started as a hobby centered around the Sakuto character with the Kalins. My first Kenshi base, Habuhoshi, unfortunately got lost at the time because of mods. But that's what inspired the whole thing. I made my first bridge using the F12 menu by hand and found it so fascinating that you could do something like that. And so that kind of got me going on the whole thing. It was like, wow, I can take the world around me in Kenshi and make it my own. And I don't know if that's the official Habuhoshi Hubstar. I don't know Japanese, so I did my best. It sounded cool at the time. I had to manually stretch that bridge out. It took hours and hours. I've advanced a lot since then. But that's what really got me started, the whole thing. And my first base was more of a fun house. I had tons of gates to try to keep out the Shek invaders. And it wasn't at a level like this one. More like a bunch of these stacked together. I didn't really know what I was doing. And since then, I've had a lot of practice. But it all started with this one bridge. It was cool, it was functional. It connected the main area, right by the hub, to my production and mining facility. So it made sense. And then I got hooked on mods. There are so many talented folks that make a bunch of mods. Once I realized I could create stuff, I was like, oh, there's ways to enrich my Kenshi experience further and make it more lively and rich. There's just too many to count. I've laid out some here. Everything from production stuff to visual stuff, lighting, caravans, I mean, you name it, there's a mod for it. Kenshi is such an incredible game and has such an incredible community. It's fantastic. So in my current playthrough, I allied with the United Cities. They're scum, but hear me out. So the way I have my Kenshi game set up is with heavily increased population settings. Squad sizes, global pop, town raids, just all cranked up. Because I tried it once, and I know that you can clear out a town with ultra characters, but with my settings, it's way more difficult to do so. I got bored with the whole easy wipes. So what's more entertaining to me is having this temporary alliance with the United Cities to destroy them later. Like snatching up all the leaders at once, right? So for now, at Scorched Corpse, I didn't start out with that name. I changed it based on how my Kenshi playthrough went this time, especially after the slaver raid happened. A little headcanon like this makes the experience more immersive for me. It's not just like, oh, there's 10 people in the Holy Nation, or there's 15 people at Hang in the Great Desert. It requires more thinking. Not too much, it's a game, but a little more thinking than I normally would before the population setting increase. So at my base, there's a little bit features, given the Great Desert surroundings, I needed resources. I recruited a bunch of these skimmers. They do a lot of good AoE, even against UC Samurai. So, that's incredible. The Tame Beasties mod made this possible. It's a great mod. Check it out, because, these skimmers are ubiquitous. They're like the desert cockroaches. They're everywhere, but they can hit hard. So it made sense to include them in my playthrough here. I used the skimmer convention for all their names. And the hounds, there's like a Grievous Hound mod. I don't remember what it's called. I think it's like a Verglas Hound, but one of them was named Grievous. I just went with G's. It helps me keep track of all the critters. I made it easier. So like any playthrough, there's a lot to do in your area, and Scorched Corpse is, just trying to survive in this harsh environment. And so in the short term, that's what matters. So after I built my town up, I was able to pay 10,000 cats in heft to ally with them. So being in the Great Desert, you've got a lot to contend with, just like anywhere on the map in Kenshi. In particular here, you've got the United Cities, of course. You got your skimmers and your various bandit factions. And so I really try to immerse myself with all these Let's Builds in the world around me. Oh, hey look, it's a Garru herd. How wonderful. So I'm sure a lot of people are asking, okay, why would you put yourself through this pain? You start Vanilla Kenshi with certain population settings and whatnot, and you don't have to have a huge army until like late game stuff, your attack cat lawn, a bugmaster, etc. Well, I kind of put myself in the Kenshi lore mindset in that, yes, a lot of the population was wiped out. However, you'd need to retain a certain amount of folks, robots, just to survive, right? So if you didn't have the population settings turned up, it's like there's like ghost towns, and there's a few large groups like the Fogmen and things like that. But most of the things in the world of Kenshi just feel empty, and I adjusted my pop settings to reflect that. You'd need a certain number of folks just to keep the planet, the moon of Kenshi going. And even with the skeletons' declining population, they would need to retain a certain number of skeletons to then rebuild the production facilities over time. I've made a ton of Let's Build Kenshi videos in various areas, like Gut, the Hidden Forest, Morn, like tons of places. New Atlantis is the mod I'm working on. Shrieking Forest was an earlier video, and the swamp, it was difficult, but it was quite an interesting area. It's great for crops, but every area in Kenshi has its good and bad points. And so, when I'm looking at doing a Let's Build, or you're looking at, hey, where do I settle, or what kind of experience I want, you just gotta kind of understand, like, where on the map you're looking, what factions are in the area, what resources you have available, and that kind of determines your gameplay. You've got United Cities and the Hook and the northern areas. The swamp is kind of far away from all that, so that's pretty good. I mean, you still have like the local bandit factions, Red Sabers, etc., but you don't have to worry about the major factions as much. But you don't have to have a base. You could have a roaming patrol that does bounties, going after the Bugmaster, or you could be in the border zone. Habuhoshi was right on the borders between the Vein and the border zone, the first base. But really, with Kenshi, you have a lot of freedom. You can build anywhere. You can do anything. It's what makes it such a fantastic game. In Vein, it has its own resources. A lot of times, even as an exiled hiver, you can recruit non-hivers to trade with the hiving villages, and you can harvest big things for the resources. Big thing eggs, their hides, their meat, etc. So there's really a whole lot of choices you have in Kenshi. Now, I have only had a minor outpost in the Aquanites territory, but I did make a base down here in the Ashlands in the Zone of None. And the good thing about that is there's a ton of resources in that area, and the Skin Bandits had a very difficult time pathing to me. In fact, they didn't even get to they didn't even start raiding my base until I opened the main gate. So you could feasibly just build there. Here's the video thumbnail in the Ashlands, and kind of be left alone, which is pretty nice for the most part. And if they do come, you just kite them to the local inhabitants to deal with them. So not a big deal there. Some of the other places I've done Let's Build Kenshi videos besides the swamp are places like Stove's Gamble, Venge, the Eye. That was interesting. Of course, building the Eye, I got raided by the Slavers. So I made a video about kiting them to the big things in Gut. And that was the Zoran episode 5 video. That was hilarious. They got absolutely demolished by the big things, as you'd expect. Now, despite that disadvantage, it was nice to be close to some of the United Cities for trade. So there's other areas to the north I've done videos on. I did the Hidden Forest, like I mentioned earlier, which is conveniently located next to World's End. It offers you a lot of technology and some recruits. So that's a fantastic video, and just really showcases the variety. Of course, you've got the cannibals in that area to deal with, so it's kind of one of those pluses and minuses that are offset by the cannibal hunters. And I'm going to keep making these Let's Build Kenshi videos to showcase each of these areas in detail, so you kind of know what you're getting into before you get there, or pick up a tip or trick or two. But beyond just that, when you're going to do a Let's Build, you're trying to build your base, there's the basics, right? If you've never used the F12 menu, you go into it, it can be like intimidating, or it's unfamiliar, right? You could be placing a building and just trying to level it out, right? You press the left bracket and hold it to level it out, and you rotate with the greater and lesser signs by the question mark key to really kind of get that fundamental placement of the building you want. So it's not a fun crooked house like my first base Habuhoshi. So those are kind of some of the fundamental things I cover in a lot of my Let's Build Kenshi videos. But there's so much more you can do in the F12 build menu, right? Let's say you want to give your town some flavor. You can pick a building, let's say this L house here, plop it down, and then when you're done with that, you can actually, given that it's outside your town's radius, you can then customize the building with any number of templates. So you don't have to place all these things yourself, all the furniture and whatnot. The interior and exterior can be customized using the layout menu. And then, now it can be tricky to then expand your town radius to do that. I've covered that in my New Atlantis and Cloud City. Cloud City had some mixed results, but I think a lot of that was the meshing with the mountain. So this is a great way to be able to customize your buildings quickly and give yourself that flavor. So you have like a real town or a real outpost or whatever. Now, when you're doing this building, save often, because when I go to delete this building, Kenshi may crash. And there it goes. So again, save often. A couple slots never hurts anyone. And we're back. So going back to the desert outpost here, I've named Scorched Corpse. Now, I started with the core area here at the walls. Now, this is more for aesthetics than defensibility, right? Because it's hard to shoot people when they're at the gate based on it curving outward. A lot of people build inverted V-shape with like double gates, but I did do the gates to kind of limit movement. Additionally, you have, meshing issues with the storm houses and the crossbow turrets. If anyone can tell me a solid solution for that, I'd love it, but my knowledge is kind of like you build them, sometimes they look like they disappear, and if you press F12, they'll reappear. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It doesn't tend to happen like on towers, but the storm houses, not so great. But there are a number of things like the double gate, triple gate system that you can use to kind of keep enemies out of your base early game until you can build up your badass force to take on the world. And I've got the steps in front here that you can use the F12 menu. CM Bridges has a option in that menu to do stairs, and you can choose the size, large, small stairs. You use the left bracket to level it out, and once you get to a point where you can interact with the mesh, you press the plus or minus key to increase or decrease the level. And of course, after you place it, you can go back in the F12 menu to make any fine adjustments as needed. So with the defensive stuff out of the way, I'm going to turn my attention to the farming section of the base and then the interior. So given this is in the desert, of course I took advantage of the height difference, and immersion wise, it's good to go into first person with a free camera. I'll talk more about later, because the fact that you can see kind of how things look, not just from a bird's eye view. The desert's got lots of challenges, for growing things. unless it's cactus, right? Cactus has a 93% growth rate and yield. Basically means it grows that fast and you get 93% of it. But that does depend on the skill of your farmer. If you don't have your farmer above a certain skill, you won't get that maximum amount. So you do see that I have wheat straw here, but I have to allocate a lot more water to keeping that alive. But I like to use that to make grog. I've got hashish unlocked, but I haven't started making it yet in this run. But I decided that, this thing, my head, there's like a deep spring or something, so there's some plant life. Just to kind of spice up the place, it adds a sense of immersion. It's not just some outpost in the middle of the desert. It's like more of an oasis. It's just, rule of cool. It just looks better that way. Now, something that's really important when you're doing all this farming stuff is job management with water. So initially I'd had a bunch of these tanks built, but that doesn't really work well when you've got a water hauler, right? So I reconfigured it to where there's several wells producing water barrels for one central tank. I have one person hauling to that tank instead of trying to get them to haul to other tanks. It's logically simpler. That's how it works best. So then they'll grab the individual water barrels, bring them to the central tank, and then any farmers will grab from that tank to replenish your crops, or if anyone's like making grog or whatnot, they'll grab from that tank as well. Now, my water hauler here doesn't seem like she's hauling at the moment, and there's water here. So, okay, looking at the inventory, we've got, maybe some reconfiguration to do. Despite the fact that I have the AI ditch items option turned on, they don't always ditch it. Maybe it's because their inventory has to be filled up. I don't know. You can leave in the comments below if you know the answer to that one. See, ditch items is on. Should have ditched the iron plates, but didn't. So, anyhow, gonna have to manually do that. See if that fixes the problem with the auto hauling. In general in Kenshi, there's a lot of things with tasks that can be tedious until you get it just right, and this is kind of one of those little things that can pop up. So let me drop off the iron plate here and see if that fixes the problem. Oh, and let me move my squad of skimmers over here. I've got them all formed up on the leader. So, anyway, back to the water hauler thing. She is still aimless. I don't know if she's trying to get to the other side of that well. So, another thing with hauling in general is you want to make sure there's plenty of space around the wells, which I'm showing you what can happen when it doesn't do that. Not because I messed it up. It's actually because I messed it up. So, let's see. She's not hauling from there. Let me see if she can grab from like the front of one of these other wells. Okay. I think she grabbed a couple of the water barrels. And so now she's hauling to the water tank because there's space there. And I guess the back side of the tank is the point there. That's another thing is you're going to want to know where that person's trying to path to. If you have a problem, oftentimes just making sure something's level and rotating can fix it. And of course, save before you do anything. Save after you're done and load it after you shift F12 to rebuild the mesh. Okay, so she's able to grab from the well beside the other one. It's closest to the tank, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Probably just take my own advice as far as making sure that second well has got enough space to it. So that's what you can do with like the water hauling to make your life easier, because there's a lot of like things that can bog you down with the base, and you don't want to do that, right? You want it to be fun. So moving on from the hauling mechanics, let's talk about some more base building stuff. So I placed some towers here, and it's important when you place any building, any tower. I'm going to save and load, or I'm going to save it before I do anything, right? Before you really fill that tower up with things, make sure it's level. So you go into the F12 menu, right? Make sure I've got the other tower over there all filled up because I've already done this. I'm going to tell you what to do before you go ahead and plop a bunch of things and then have pathing issues, right? You want to make sure that your building is good before you place anything in it. So to do that, you go to the F12. Make sure you're not in this. You don't want yaw pitch roll. No. You want XYZ. You hit the reset button, and that will level the y-axis to the ground mesh level. And once you do that, of course, you're going to want to shift F11, rebuild the mesh after you reset it. I like to save and load for good measure. And then take someone and test out a building. So you've got some leeway. You don't have to always use exactly what the game says as far as the ground level, but there's a margin of error there, right? So a good way of testing that, let's say you want to build this, Y building into the side of this little dirt mound here, just sand mound. You take a character, you click inside the building, and make sure they can path through that. And you should also make sure if you want anything on the roof, they can path the roof, right? But basically, you've got a little bit of leeway, test things, rebuild the mesh, and I've got a number of videos that show in detail. The snail house, for example, in my Let's Build Kenshi Gut video, I show it completely into the side of a hill to the point where you can start seeing like underneath the texture, but it looked good on the inside. And so there's just those little kinds of things that can really help you when you're making your base look exactly the way you want it. And another way you can test if the building works is if your person is assigned jobs, you have them go in the building, if they can then exit the building as usual, so that you test both ways, then you're doubly sure that your pathing is good and you can fill the buildings whatever you want. Now with base building, it's all about the setting, the functionality, but also the vibe. And what I like to do when I'm making each build is to not only see things from a bird's eye view and go, yeah, that looks great, but to go down to the ground level and really look at how it looks through the first person point of view. Because you can see a lot of things look different. Like when I was making my first base, Habuhoshi, from above it was like, oh, there's really nothing going on here, but it takes people forever to get to places, and I didn't know why. Well, it's because there's lots of hills. It's actually a farther distance when you're up close. The name Scorched Corpse comes from some peeler machines I had here. When I deleted them, there was bodies standing upright. I put braziers under them as a joke. Unfortunately, they despawned. So things always look different at the ground level. I like to watch the workers go about their day, whether they're guarding or they're, mining something or making something, right? It just looks cool. Again, the CM's Road mod really allows you to add your flavor. There's several different types of roads, but you can kind of see, as opposed to this point of view, right, way up in the clouds, when you really get in close, you can see the different perspective, and it's pretty cool. You can kind of follow, your squad around and see what they're doing, and it's just a neat look, just a neat feel to the whole thing. Adds really to the whole experience. And an advantage about looking at the ground level is you can also see the functionality. We've got our weaponsmith down the road here, and you can see from the ground level you got the folks doing their stuff. You've got the iron refineries, you got the iron ore container there, and you can really see, I put that all by the forging building. Now there are mods you can put inside, it's probably better, but given what I've got, it makes a lot of sense. And another thing about ground levels, see how tall these walls are? I'm not sure if they're like 30 feet or whatever, but they're tall, but you don't really see that if you're looking at it from a bird's eye view. So these are the kind of things you can see at the ground level that really just give you that immersion that you won't get from purely managing your base from 200 feet up, so to speak. And so my base being right by Shabatai, I've got this road leading to it, and I built it in such a way that kind of made sense, where I curved it around the sand dunes. I know that sand's not great to build on, but you certainly want to build it on the flatter areas and not on top of the sand dunes. So I kind of curved it around. Also, rule of cool, it looks better this way, right? Leading from our outpost, Scorched Corpse, to Shabatai here. And it just looks a lot better. It gives you that kind of lived-in feel. It adds a little spice to your playthrough. And so as you're walking along, you can see the different folks going about their day and and doing things. I'll get to why this iron spider is perched outside the front gate later on in the video. But going through the main gate, you can imagine walking through the town. Whether you're a traveler, one of the squad, you know, a patrol or whatnot. Just really cool to have that immersive feeling. I use the Suzuki Reshader mod to get my look in Kenshi. Now there's some good points and bad points. Mostly the lens flare from the sun is kind of a bad thing, but the hero in his head has a great YouTube video, next gen graphics Kenshi, to really help you tweak it to your liking. So with my town build, you know, things like narrow, you know, kind of narrow valleys, alleyways are something you see from the ground level. I like to incorporate, you know, as you build up your outpost, land becomes more valuable, you start putting stuff in a smaller space than when you first start out. So heading on back to the weapons forge here, you know, you've got the look from above and you've got the functionality. So when you're building a base, you always want to balance those two things out, right? Obviously, it's got to be functional and it's got to look good. So again, to that point of, you know, the refineries being right by the ore storage, and the workers, I don't have a drill yet, but the workers aren't too far away mining that iron ore that goes into all of that. And I put an item furnace, excuse me. And that's great because you can take all the little clubs and, you know, armor from, you know, people that you've fallen yourself or they've been taken out by skimmers, and throw it in here for some extra iron that your folks can then use to forge into weapons, armor, and whatnot. And as always, you want to make sure the pathing is clear with whatever you're building in and outside a building, so that your characters can freely move to and from to do the various tasks they need to do. And again, here's where they're mining the ore. Eventually I'm going to have a drill there. Not sure how that'll fit with the town aesthetic. Maybe I'll put it across the street or something. But anyhow, it all makes sense. It all flows. And that's the balance with any kind of outpost you make. Now, based on the colorful lighting mod I mentioned earlier, you can't see it right now, but I've got green for power and blue for crafting. Especially like this, I'm making electrical components here. So that just clues me in real quickly at a glance, you know, what's going on. I'm going to take my character and show off another mod I mentioned earlier that allows you to do geothermal power, which is really cool. And Harris is one of my faster characters. I think I recruited him because his athletics are like through the roof, right? He's a Scorchlander, runs really fast, which is great for a lot of things. Anyway, this geothermal mod is really cool. You basically make some fuel, you put a unit in, you make sure that there's at least a little bit of water, which even in the desert there is, with the battery backup. And there is lithium-ion batteries, but I haven't researched that yet in my tech tree. So the other side of it is where we make the fuel. And I've chose the version of wheat straw just because, despite the slow growth rate, I have a lot of farms, and so I can afford the power to make wheat straw into fuel to then put the unit into the geothermal generator. Now the geothermal generator conveniently doesn't use up fuel, but even if it did, we have that facility. So we just prime it with the initial fuel and then it just does its thing. And it produces a lot of power, like 500 units of power per thing. So even in the Great Desert, with this air at 100%, we can still grow enough wheat straw, given that we've got, I started with level 2 wells, but even, level 2 wells, level 3 wells allows you to still grow enough wheat straw. But you do want to be mindful of where you're trying to grow what, right? This environment is arid. So essentially, I don't remember the 3 categories, but it's like very dry, kind of moist, and like swamp are the 3 types of environments. And so when you go to place down a crop, it'll tell you how fast it's going to grow and how much crop yield you get when you do harvest. So Great Desert's, got a lot of resources. Water, barely there. Fertility, not bad, but it is arid. Of course, stone, solid. Now, if I had a higher prospector skill, I'd be able to see more precisely, right? So if I just came here, I have kind of an idea of where this copper is, but I would be like, not quite sure. So getting your prospector skill up isn't a requirement, obviously, but it can help, especially if you're scouting early on, and if you really need to make moves before you can like kind of run away from things. You kind of want to know where to set up, right? So getting more into the particulars of that, again, crop yield. Lower amount of crop yield means when you go to a harvest, you're not going to get as much. And of course, that's the 46% there is based on your farmer having a certain minimum skill. I don't know what that is, but it'll tell you when you're harvesting, right? So Harris is at a skill of 81, and so he's going to get that maximum amount as opposed to someone just starting out farming. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to grow crops in an area. And I've got a number of ways of farming. To the point I made earlier, cactus being an arid climate, you've got a 93% yield, a 93% growth rate, assuming that you have a farm with a high enough skill. But the good news is you can level up farming pretty quickly. I'm only on day 74, and I have started out pretty good, but even some of my guys who were at like level 1 are in their 30s or 40s, right? So it's certainly feasible. Now, a lot of my Let's Build Kenshi videos have focused on more established bases, the Great Desert being one of the locations, but you don't have to do a big base. You can do an outpost. There's so many different things you can do, and using the F12 and some of the tricks can help you get that aesthetic that you want. Now, if you're finding yourself bored with your Kenshi playthrough, chances are you've been a base dweller, or the opposite, or you haven't really traveled the map. There's so many cool places to explore. You could start in the border zone. You could be a group of Shek warriors seeking to overthrow the factions. You could start with the Hivers. I mean, there's countless areas, like whether or not you want to take on the world or just do a farming simulator in the swamp. There's just no limit. And a large reason why I do the Let's Build Kenshi videos is just to show off some of the things you can do, but also like the environment, kind of a mindset of like immersion, playing more on 1x versus triple speed all of the time. I thought about setting up, and I might do this in the future video, a little outpost in Wind to where I have a bounty hunter, and the waterway providing an excellent defense, of course, for anyone that would want to attack my little tower outpost. A lot of folks use that water defense because it's so good. I haven't shown it off a lot, but now that I mentioned it, I'll probably need to include that in a future video, but water's OP for sure. You can settle in the bone fields. I've got a Let's Build Kenshi Morn video showing them some early game stuff you can do to make sure you survive. There's just tons of areas around the whole map. I'm working on a new Atlantis mod that's like off the coast, right about there, and it's going to take forever because modding is hard work. But there's just really no limit to what you can do, and that's what makes Kenshi so amazing. The world's really your oyster. Before I go, I wanted to cover some of the wall building basics I've covered in other videos, but if you haven't seen those, I'll show a little bit here. When you're making a wall, you want to make it level as possible before you even mess around with F12. I don't tend to use the defensive wall 5 because bigger objects in Kenshi tend to have pathing problems because of the meshing logic and whatnot. So I tend to avoid using that, but in general, you want to make sure to build as level as you can before you do the fine tuning so you don't have to do a whole lot, right? So let's say I want to place down a wall, right? So I select, I'm going to use defensive wall 4 here. So you'll see there's, places you want to tend to put a wall and places you don't. And if you do it over a hill, you tend to have more problems. But you, in general, definitely want to do it in the segments. And you can see where it goes from 4 to the 5 wall segment, and it'll look it'll be a solid piece at that point, making it a lot easier to edit that segment later as opposed to each tiny little piece, right? So even if you did build over a hill, like I've done in some of the sections of my base, you can do it a lot easier when it's that bigger segment versus the smaller one, like that. So once you've built your wall, to make fine-tune adjustments, right, you want to make sure that your wall, first of all, is level to the ground. So F12, use the X, Y, Z coordinates, like we covered earlier with the tower. And of course, Y is the green arrow, X is the red arrow, and blue is the Z direction. So Y is the one that will level it to the ground. When you hit that reset button, it resets that Y coordinate to whatever that mesh level is on the ground. And if you've got any kind of issues with people going through your walls, bandits are going through your walls or whatnot, they're just walking straight through, that's usually the reason why. Another thing you want to do is make sure your walls are level. So you want the pitch and roll to be 0. And the pitch in this case is like, see that direction? The left, as we're looking at it, left, right. Roll will be if it went towards or away from you. I've got a video on that. I think it's my gut video that talks more about yaw pitch and roll. But anyhow, you want to set pitch and roll to 0. You're going to want to save at least every 2 wall segments because, at least in my experience, the game can crash if you don't. Now, my Let's Build Kenshi Gut video has more in-depth of a tutorial on like repositioning things. But you can move with the XYZ, that moves it in those 3 coordinates. And then the other stuff, like mostly if you want to angle your wall for a certain look, you do that in the other menu. And now we get to why this iron spider's here at this prisoner pole outside my main gate. So what you can do, I can't recruit these guys with the Tame Beasties mod. There might be another one. But what I'm doing is, let's say I get betrayed by the United Cities or the slavers. Imagine that, slavers betraying you, of course. Because I'm going to have a number of these guys right here locked up. Now, I wasn't able to down them with my forces because they're not tough enough yet, so I'll use the turret on the tower to the right. But I'm going to put these guys as kind of a miniature tactical nuke, if you will, right? So I'll have a few of these guys lined up. If I have a big raid incoming, I'll free them. I think it's like they're going to be knocked out for like 30 seconds, and then there'll be a bunch of them, and they can clear out a lot. I mean, slavers would stand no chance. Even heavily armored samurai would get just absolutely owned by these Mark II iron spiders. So that's the methodology behind why this guy's locked up here. So this has been a little overview of what got me into my Let's Build Kenshi videos. I'll have a lot more to come, and hope you learned something, got out something, and you enjoyed this video. Till next time.